There's misinformation. I think a lot of misinformation, frankly, is disinformation. And by that, I mean it represents an intentional effort by an actor, foreign or domestic in the United States, to spread information that people know is not true. And what it shows is that what we talked about, say, 5 or 10 years ago about cyber attacks, namely, an attack on physical infrastructure to take it down, as we've seen in many instances, has now spread to simply trying to mislead the public. And I think it's a very fair question for us to think about. I mean, I sometimes wonder, in all of the years of the Soviet Union, did the Soviet Air Force ever develop an aircraft that did as much damage to the United States as Russian disinformation campaigns have done through social media over the last 4 years? I would argue that the answer is no. And in fact, all of that disinformation and now the adoption of those techniques by certain groups in the United States is not just leading to a public that's less well informed, but a public that is more polarized. And as the public becomes more polarized, our civic institutions are being weakened. So in fact, I think you see all 4 of these things connected, and we need to address them in a holistic way as a result.
Ian, I feel like we're living through the death of foreign policy wonkery right now because it feels like our internal domestic political conversation has merged with foreign policy conversations, if not taken it over entirely. When we talk about disinformation and the weakness of our political institutions and misinformation, are we talking about external threats or internal threats in your view?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I agree completely that the Soviets historically did a lot more damage with disinformation than they did with their bomber jets. But I also think that the reason that we beat the Soviets is because ultimately our ideas, our information was better than theirs. Our values actually mattered more to their own people and to those that were behind the Berlin Wall. And that's what brought it down. Individual liberties, a free market that worked, and the ability to create opportunity, both for those inside the country born and also those that tried so hard to get to the United States. And I think a lot of those ideas no longer feel as legitimized to the average American. Look, the Russians are engaging in disinformation, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. But it's more effective in the United States. And the reason it's more effective is because so many more Americans are prepared to hear that message, are already feeling like the institutions do not work for them, like the system is rigged. That's why they were prepared to vote for President Trump. That's why they've been so upset with the American establishment, whether we're talking about political leaders or the mainstream media or scientists, even the CDC. All of these institutions have been weakened. And so I really do believe that, there's a reason why in Germany Russian disinformation hasn't done as well as it has in the United States. And it's because the German government is seen as functioning more effectively for the average German than the American institutions are for the average American. And in that way, you're absolutely right, Susan, that foreign policy wonkery is becoming more challenging in that environment, because the answers, so many of them, are going to be first and foremost at home.
Well, again, just on this subject of misinformation, I see everybody sort of nodding their heads, because would you say that that's an external threat from Russia? Or is it an internal crisis when you have the president of the United States spreading Russian information through his platforms?
It's clearly more of an internal crisis than external crisis. Look, the Russians were interfering in U.S. institutions and elections, not just now, but in 2016. And the American response, including by President Obama, was inadequate, in my view, at that time. Much more inadequate under Trump right now. But if you ask me where disinformation is coming from the most in the United States, it's from within the United States, and the fact that the vast majority of Americans are only consuming information that already confirms their pre-existing beliefs. And that means that no matter what Trump has to say, no matter how much that does or does not comport with reality and data, there is a group of 35–40% of the population that will accept it no matter what. And the other side, that's true as well. And the worst time for that possible would be an election, and would be the magnitude of economic epidemiological and social crisis that we're experiencing in the United States right now.